On the night the world forgot her name, Amma sat beneath a dim street lamp, clutching the memories of a life that no longer belonged to her. It was the kind of night when even the wind seemed to mourn with her, carrying whispers of a future she could not yet imagine. And in that fragile silence, destiny began stirring, not out of mercy, but out of a promise life makes to those who have lost everything. Amma had not always lived in the shadows of markets and alleyways. She once carried laughter effortlessly, moving through her village with the grace of a woman who knew love, home, and belonging. Her husband Kofi had been her gentle companion, a man whose steady voice grounded her even in uncertain seasons. Their marriage was not wealthy, not adorned with luxury, but it held a peace that wrapped around her like warm cloth. When illness took him suddenly, it felt as if the ground beneath her had caved in, swallowing the world she had built around his presence. His absence was not just emotional, it was structural. Without him, life lost shape, lost direction, lost color. Yet grief rarely arrives alone. It often brings with it a cruelty that waits in the shadows, ready to take advantage of the heart, too broken to fight back. Amma's in-laws, hiding behind a warped interpretation of tradition, seized the home Kofi had built with sweat-stained hands. They told her she no longer belonged there, that her presence was a burden they would no longer carry. She left quietly because grief had drained the fire from her voice, leaving only the echo of love she wasn't yet ready to let go of. With no shelter, no savings, and no family willing to stand beside her, she stepped into a world where survival depended on the thin line between hunger and hope. The marketplace became her refuge, not by choice, but by necessity. Each night she found a small corner near shuttered stalls, curling herself under the weight of exhaustion. The ground was cold, the nights long, and the air carried the bitter reminder that she no longer belonged anywhere. She learned to wake before dawn, gathering scraps that vendors discarded as they prepared for business. Sometimes she found a bruised mango, sometimes only crumbs swept from tables. She accepted each offering with silent gratitude, bowed not by shame, but by the discipline of endurance. People walked past her daily, some with curiosity, others with pity, many with indifference. But it was not their eyes that haunted her. It was the sense of becoming invisible in a world she once moved freely through. Still, within her chest lived a thread of resilience she did not fully understand. Every time despair seemed ready to consume her, she remembered Kofi's steady hands, his gentle words, his belief in her strength. And each night, as she lay beneath the muted glow of the moon, she whispered his name, promising that the love they shared would continue guiding her, even in the darkest corners of her life. But survival is not measured only by the food a person finds. It is measured by the quiet courage that grows in the spaces where hope should have died. Amma discovered that courage slowly, in the way she woke each morning even when her body begged for rest, in the way she preserved her dignity even when circumstances tried to strip it away. She did not complain. She did not crumble. She simply kept moving, unaware that her endurance was beginning to draw the attention of forces she could not yet see. Life has a way of observing people who live with sincerity, even when the world looks away. Amma believed she was alone, forgotten, swallowed by sorrow. But far beyond the tired alleys and dusty stalls, destiny was turning gently in her direction, preparing an encounter, a test, a moment that would challenge everything she thought she had left to give. And soon, in a single breath of fate and hunger, the world would ask her for a sacrifice she was not ready to make, one that would open the first door to a future waiting quietly at the edge of her suffering. Some days arrive disguised as ordinary, yet beneath them lies a turning point destiny has planned with precision. Amma felt that shift the moment her trembling fingers brushed against a forgotten piece of stale bread, an unlikely treasure in a life stripped down to its bare bones. Amma had woken that morning with the familiar ache gnawing at her stomach, a slow-burning emptiness that had become as constant as the rising sun. The marketplace had barely begun to stir, its wooden stalls still cloaked in dawn's cool shadows. She moved quietly, not wanting to draw unwanted attention, her eyes scanning the ground with the careful hope of someone who had learned to find survival in overlooked places. And then, near a step where a vendor had closed late the previous night, she spotted it. A small loaf of bread, hardened at the edges, flattened from being stepped on, but still whole. To someone else it would have been waste. To Amma, it was salvation. Her breath caught in her throat as she reached for it, her hands trembling not only from hunger, but from the fragile relief of finding something that might carry her through another day. She held it close for a moment, feeling its weight, as though confirming it was real. The world around her seemed to fade, leaving only the silent acknowledgement that today, at least, she would not collapse under the suffocating pressure of starvation. She tucked the bread gently into the fold of her wrapper and walked toward the far edge of the marketplace, her steps slow but steady. By the time she reached the shelter of the old acacia tree, the sun had begun its steady climb, casting dappled patterns across the earth. Amma lowered herself to the ground, leaning against the rough bark as she unwrapped the precious loaf. Her body felt light, almost fragile, as though hunger had hollowed out her strength from the inside. Her head swayed slightly as she inhaled the faint scent of the bread, and for a brief moment, she closed her eyes, remembering days long gone when meals were eaten with conversation, laughter, and the quiet comfort of knowing tomorrow would offer the same. She broke off a small piece, her hands unsteady, and brought it to her lips. The bread was dry, rough and tasteless, but to her it felt like a lifeline stretched across the widening gap between despair and endurance. Every bite she planned to take would need to be measured, controlled, stretched across hours to keep her body from weakening further. She knew the dangers of sudden eating after long hunger. She had learned the rhythm of survival the way others learned to read or write. Slow, careful, patient. Today, this small loaf would be her guardian. Yet hunger is never quiet when it has lingered too long. It twisted inside her like a restless spirit, tightening her stomach until the pain pulsed behind her ribs. Her vision blurred for a moment, forcing her to steady herself with a hand against the ground. Sweat gathered along her forehead despite the shade, and she blinked rapidly, reminding herself that she needed only a small taste to bring strength back into her limbs. She lifted another piece of bread, her body tense with anticipation, knowing that even a crumb could steady her heartbeat. The world around her seemed still, the rustling leaves, the distant voices of traders, the shifting dust. She felt suspended in a quiet space between suffering and relief, a moment so fragile she feared any movement might shatter it. This bread was not just food. It was the final thread holding her life together, the one thing that reminded her she had not been completely abandoned by fate. And yet, just as she prepared to take her first real bite, the world intruded again, not with violence, but with a trembling plea carried on a weak, breathless voice behind her. She stiffened, the bread frozen inches from her lips, as the sound pierced through the air like an unanswered prayer. It was a voice drenched in desperation, softer than a whisper, but heavy enough to make her heart falter. Amma turned slowly, the bread still in her hand, as the fragile voice repeated its plea, forcing her to face a moment of sacrifice she had never imagined, and pulling her toward a destiny far greater than her hunger. True kindness appears when a person gives what they cannot afford to lose, when the heart steps forward, even as the body trembles in need. Amma was about to face such a moment, one that would test not only her hunger, but the very depth of her humanity. Amma had barely gathered enough strength to lift the piece of bread again when she heard the faint shuffle of footsteps behind her. At first she thought it might be a vendor starting early, or a child passing through the market. But the sound was uneven, dragging, as though carried by someone fighting gravity itself. Before she could rise or turn, a shadow fell across her lap, followed by a soft thud against the dry earth. She twisted her body slowly, her heart tightening, and saw a man lying only a few feet away. His clothes were dusty and torn, clinging to his thin frame as though even fabric struggled to find life on him. His breaths came shallow and irregular, each one a battle waged in silence. He looked at her with eyes that carried a depth of exhaustion she recognized instantly. Eyes that had seen too many hungry nights, too many hopeless mornings. When he tried to speak, the words collapsed into a trembling whisper. "Please." "Food," he managed, his voice breaking as though it had forgotten how to form sound. His gaze drifted to the bread in her hands, and shame flickered across his face, the kind of shame hunger forces upon the proud. Amma froze, the world narrowing to the loaf she held, and the man sprawled before her. Hunger surged inside her again, sharp and urgent, reminding her of her own frail state. Her hands trembled as she held the bread. It had taken her days to find it. She had survived nights with nothing, and now, with salvation finally in her grasp, life was demanding that she share it. Her breath quivered as she stared at the stranger, feeling her heart split between instinct and compassion. For a moment, she considered looking away, pretending she had nothing more to give. After all, no one would blame her. She had lived in hunger for too long, fought too hard for each bite. But then she saw how the man's fingers scraped weakly at the ground, as though searching for a chance even he no longer believed in. Something in that small, helpless movement pulled at the deepest part of her, the part shaped by loss, by grief, by the memory of her husband's gentle voice reminding her that compassion was the one thing poverty could never steal from a person. With a slow and steady breath, Amma tore the loaf in two. Her fingers hovered for a long moment as she stared at the larger piece in her hand. Her hunger roared, her stomach twisting painfully, but she extended the bigger portion toward the man. His eyes widened with disbelief, followed by a flicker of gratitude so sincere it tightened her throat. He reached for the bread, as though afraid it might vanish before his fingers touched it. When he took the first bite, tears streamed down his face, not from the taste, but from the overwhelming mercy woven into the gesture. Amma watched silently as he ate, piece by piece, slowly, carefully, savoring each small fragment like someone tasting hope for the first time in years. Every bite that disappeared from his hand made the ache in her stomach sharpen, and yet, beneath that ache, a quiet warmth spread through her chest. She could not name it, but she felt it deepen, an unexpected peace rising through hunger, a reminder that giving did not always empty a person. Sometimes it revealed the strength they never knew they carried. When he finally finished, the man wiped his face with trembling hands. He pushed himself upright, still weak but no longer collapsing, and looked at Amma as though he were seeing something sacred. His voice was quiet, rough but certain as he whispered, "Your kindness, I will never forget. It will return to you." There was something in his tone, an assurance, a promise, almost a prophecy, that made the air around them feel suddenly heavier. And as he stood to leave, still unsteady but filled with renewed life, Amma felt a strange chill ripple through her, as though his parting words were not merely gratitude, but the first tremor of a destiny already shifting toward her without warning. Kindness brings peace, but uncertainty brings fear. And that night, Amma felt both battling inside her, as if her heart had become a quiet battleground. The stranger's blessing, spoken with a trembling voice and a depth she could not explain, refused to leave her mind. Long after the traveler had disappeared down the dusty path, Amma remained seated beneath the acacia tree, staring at the place where his shadow had faded into the evening light. The warmth of the moment had slipped away, leaving behind a strange, lingering tremor that echoed through her chest. She had shared her bread out of instinct, out of the last thread of compassion she had left. But what unsettled her was not the sacrifice. It was the way his voice had carried both sorrow and gratitude, as if he had spoken not only for himself, but for something far beyond her understanding. His words pulsed in her memory like a quiet drumbeat. Your kindness will return to you. There was no promise in the world she trusted anymore, yet something in his voice had made her feel seen, as if destiny had turned its gaze toward her for the first time in years. As the sun dipped behind the roofs of the marketplace, darkness began settling over the open ground where Amma slept each night. She curled against a cracked wall for warmth, pulling her thin cloth over her shoulders as the temperature fell sharply. Her body, already weakened, felt the familiar ache of hunger returning with unforgiving sharpness. The portion of bread she had kept for herself had barely softened the emptiness inside her. Every hour, her stomach twisted harder, sending waves of discomfort that made her vision blur and her breath hitch. Yet within that exhaustion lived a quiet calm she couldn't explain. A gentle stillness, as though giving had carved a space inside her that hunger couldn't fully devour. Still, questions haunted her. Who was that man? Why had he been traveling alone? What weight had he carried behind his hollow eyes? And why had his final words felt less like gratitude and more like prophecy? Amma pressed her fingers against her temple, trying to chase away the thoughts, but they returned each time she closed her eyes. She wondered if he had once lived a life like hers, filled with love, loss, and unspoken wounds. She wondered if he, too, had known the kind of grief that shadows a widow's silence. The more she thought, the heavier her heart became, not because she feared him, but because she sensed that their encounter had been far from accidental. The night deepened, wrapping the marketplace in stillness. Traders had gone home, fires had burned out, and stray dogs wandered lazily between empty stalls. Amma shifted onto her side, trying to find a position that eased the dizziness from hunger, but every movement only sharpened the weakness in her limbs. Her breaths grew shallow, and her eyelids fluttered with fatigue, yet beneath the fragile shell of her body, something unfamiliar stirred. A strange awareness, a quiet intuition, as though threads of fate were being pulled around her life in gentle but deliberate motions. She felt no fear, only a sense that something unseen was rearranging itself, shaping the edges of a future she could not yet glimpse. Hours passed, blurring together in a haze of discomfort and restless thoughts. At times she drifted into half-sleep, only to be jolted awake by the biting emptiness in her belly. But each time she woke, the memory of the traveler's blessing hovered over her like a fragile light. His face, his trembling hands, the way he looked at her, as if he could see the weight she carried, replayed in her mind until dawn began brushing the world with pale gold. As the first rays of morning filtered through the market stalls, Amma forced herself upright, her muscles trembling under her own weight. She rubbed her eyes, trying to shake off the lingering heaviness of the night. The ground was still cool beneath her feet when she heard it, soft footsteps approaching from behind her. Her breath caught, her heartbeat stumbling with equal parts hope and fear. She turned slowly, half expecting to see the traveler return, but the figure walking toward her was someone entirely different, someone whose presence would alter the rhythm of her life far more deeply than she ever imagined. Sometimes destiny wears the face of a stranger, and sometimes it returns wearing another, quiet, deliberate, carrying truths that can shatter or save. Amma had no idea that this morning, beneath the same tree where she had shared her last bread, her life was about to bend in a direction she never imagined. Morning light spilled across the market, like a gentle awakening, brushing over wooden stalls, woven baskets, and the dusty paths where traders would soon gather. Amma sat beneath the acacia tree, her body still weak from hunger and a night of restless questioning. She pressed a hand against her chest, trying to steady the uneasy rhythm inside her, as she watched people slowly emerge from distant alleys. Nothing felt unusual at first, just the same flow of footsteps, the same murmurs of shopkeepers preparing their goods, the same predictable rhythm of a world she lived in but no longer belonged to. And yet, a faint tension lingered in the air, like a warning wrapped in silence. Then she saw him, a tall man in richly woven fabric, walked with purpose across the empty stretch of ground, between the shops. His clothing shimmered subtly in the rising sun, deep blues and earthen reds that marked wealth, respect, and authority. The traders bowed their heads slightly as he passed, speaking his name with reverence. Amma had seen men like him only from a distance, men whose lives were sheltered from hunger by walls of abundance. She shrank into the shade, instinctively pulling her torn shawl tighter around her shoulders. Her heart beat faster. Wealthy merchants rarely approached the homeless unless they wished to chase them away. He paused just a few steps from her, scanning the space beneath the tree, as though searching for someone specific. Amma lowered her gaze, praying silently that he would overlook her. But fate had not brought him here to ignore her. "You," he said gently, "are you the widow who sleeps beneath this tree?" Amma's breath caught. Her first instinct was fear. Fear of being driven out of the only place she could rest. Fear of being accused of loitering or stealing. Fear of losing even the fragile routine she clung to. She nodded slowly, her voice too faint to form a reply. The merchant studied her quietly, not with the sharpness of judgment, but with a strange mix of curiosity and respect, as though he were trying to match her face to a story he already knew. "I was told," he continued, "that a starving traveler collapsed near this place yesterday." Amma felt her hands tremble. She glanced toward the path where the traveler had disappeared the evening before, the memory of his faded silhouette rising vividly in her mind. She swallowed the knot tightening in her throat. "Yes," she whispered. He was hungry. I only had a little bread." She hesitated. "I shared it with him." The merchant's posture shifted slightly, his eyes narrowing, not in suspicion, but in deep contemplation. Amma's breath quickened. Had the man done something wrong? Was she now tangled in trouble she didn't deserve? She braced herself for accusations she would not be strong enough to fight. But instead, he asked softly, "Why did you help him?" Amma blinked, stunned by the simplicity of the question. Why? Because she could not turn away from suffering. Because she knew too well the taste of empty days and sleepless nights. Because kindness was the last fragment of her identity that grief had not taken. But she could not form the words, so she simply said, "He needed it more than I did." The merchant studied her with an expression she had not seen in years, genuine respect. It unsettled her almost more than anger would have. People did not look at homeless widows that way. They looked through them, over them, past them. But this man looked at her as if she mattered. He took a slow breath, lowering his gaze before lifting it again with a heaviness Amma could not interpret. "I did not come to chase you away," he said softly. "I came because the traveler you helped. He was not just a hungry man, wandering alone." Amma's heart stumbled, a cold wave shooting through her. The merchant stepped closer, his voice lowering with significance that made the ground feel suddenly unsteady beneath her. "He is my brother," the merchant said, "and there is something you need to know about who he truly is." Some truths land softly, others strike like thunder, shattering the boundaries of a life in a single breath. And as the merchant's words unfolded, Amma felt the ground beneath her spirit tremble, as though destiny itself had stepped forward to reveal what it had been hiding. For a long moment, Amma simply stared at the merchant, unable to form a response. His face held no trace of cruelty, no sign of anger, only a gravity that made her pulse thud painfully in her throat. The wind brushed gently against the acacia leaves above her, but the world below had gone still. She clutched her shawl closer, unsure whether she should speak, flee, or continue breathing, as though this moment were not unraveling the very fabric of her existence. The merchant lowered himself into a crouch so he could meet her eye to eye. The gesture surprised her, Men of his status rarely bent their bodies, let alone their pride, before someone like her. His expression was filled not with superiority, but with the weight of a truth he had carried carefully to this moment. "Amma," he began, his voice steady. "The traveler you helped yesterday. He is not merely my brother. He is my only son." Amma blinked rapidly, her mind struggling to grasp the words. The young man's frail body, the trembling hands, the hollow stomach. They had shown nothing of privilege, nothing of inheritance, nothing that hinted at kinship with the wealthiest merchant in the region. She shook her head slightly, unable to understand how someone belonging to such a world could have collapsed on dust while starving. The merchant continued before she could speak. "He left home months ago," he said quietly. "He traveled without escort, without wealth, without revealing his name. He told no one where he would go or how long he would stay. He wanted—" The man paused, swallowing the emotion rising in his throat. "He wanted to understand the suffering of the people I claimed to help." Amma felt a soft ache rise in her chest. The traveler's eyes, so tired yet hopeful, returned vividly to her mind. She remembered the way he whispered blessings after eating, blessings that felt heavier than gratitude. "He told me," the merchant whispered, "that he had lost faith in humanity. Until he met you." Amma's breath caught sharply. She looked down at her weathered hands, the hands that had held the last bread she possessed. She had not acted to impress anyone. She had simply followed the instinct her late husband had admired most in her: compassion, even in emptiness. The merchant exhaled softly. "You restored something in him that I feared was gone forever. And for that, Amma, I owe you a debt beyond measure." Amma recoiled slightly, shaking her head with sudden panic. "No, no, please," she murmured, her voice trembling. "I need nothing. I did not help him for reward. I only did what my heart demanded." Shame flushed through her as she spoke, as though accepting anything would taint the purity of the moment she had shared with the traveler. But the merchant's gaze sharpened with a determination she did not expect. "Do not refuse me," he said, gently but firmly. "Kindness such as yours must never be left unanswered." Amma pressed her palm to the ground beside her, trying to steady herself against the rising swirl of disbelief. She felt overwhelmed, embarrassed, almost frightened by the sudden shift between the world she knew and the world she was being pulled toward. She shook her head again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have lived with nothing for so long. I am used to it. Please, do not trouble yourself." The merchant rose slowly, his figure tall and unyielding against the morning sun. "Amma," he said with quiet authority, "you shared your only meal with the heir to everything I own. You offered him life when you barely held on to yours." He paused, letting the truth settle heavily in the air. "I am not a man who takes such a blessing lightly." Amma's breath tightened. She sensed that whatever came next was far beyond her ability to prevent. And as the merchant stepped closer, determination burning in his eyes, Amma realized this was no simple gratitude. He intended to repay her kindness in a way that would alter her life forever, whether she felt ready for it or not. Life rarely gives without taking. Yet on this day, fate stepped toward Amma with open hands, offering a blessing so unexpected it felt like a mistake, an act of grace that defied every wound she carried, every hardship she had endured, every whisper of unworthiness she had learned to accept. The morning sun cast a warm, gentle glow over the village as the merchant guided Amma through quiet pathways she had never walked before. Her steps felt uncertain, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and disbelief. Just yesterday, she had slept curled beneath a market stall, clutching her thin shawl against the cold. Today, she followed a wealthy man through shaded alleys and dusty lanes, unsure whether she was dreaming or drifting through some mercy she had not earned. Each step forward felt like trespassing into a world that did not belong to her. The merchant walked with measured calm, glancing back now and then to ensure she kept pace. Amma wondered if he saw the tremor in her hands or heard the unspoken questions echoing inside her. She wanted to ask where he was taking her, but the weight of awe held her voice still. After a long walk, he stopped before a small home tucked between two tall jacaranda trees. Its walls were faded but strong, its windows dusty but intact, its roof weathered yet sturdy. It was not grand, but, to Amma's eyes, accustomed to open skies and cold ground, it looked like a palace. The merchant turned to her with a gentleness she had not expected. "This house," he said quietly, "has been empty for years. I kept it for travelers, for those who needed shelter in passing. But yesterday, my son told me something I cannot forget. He said kindness should never sleep under the open sky." Amma blinked rapidly, unable to process his words. Her chest tightened with confusion, gratitude, and fear. Emotions colliding so fiercely, she felt breathless. "Sir," she whispered, her voice trembling, I cannot. This is too much. I have nothing to give you in return." The merchant shook his head slowly. "I am not asking for anything. The only price for kindness," he said softly, "is to allow it to continue its journey." He reached for the rusted key hanging beside the doorway and placed it gently into her hand. The cool metal felt impossibly heavy, as though it carried the weight of a future she had never dared to imagine. Amma's fingers closed around it with a hesitance born from a lifetime of loss. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the sight of the home before her. "Why me?" she whispered, half afraid the question would break the fragile moment. "There are many who suffer, many who need help. I am just a widow with nothing left." The merchant's expression softened further. "You are a widow who gave half her life to a stranger," he answered. "You gave bread when you had none to spare. That kind of heart deserves shelter." He paused, letting the silence settle between them. "This house is yours, Amma. It belongs to the goodness inside you." Amma swallowed hard, the knot in her throat tightening painfully. For months she had slept beneath open skies, curled against cold stone floors, shrinking herself into corners to avoid attention. To stand before a door that opened not to judgment, but to refuge, felt overwhelming. She touched the wooden frame with trembling fingertips, feeling its warmth beneath the sun. She stepped inside, slowly, her breath catching at the sight of the small clay stove, the straw mat neatly rolled in the corner, and the narrow window that welcomed soft light into the room. It was simple, but it was hers. A room where night would no longer hunt her. A space where silence would finally feel gentle, not frightening. That night, Amma lay on the mat beneath the roof, her first roof in months. She listened to the distant hum of the village, the rustle of leaves outside, the quiet stillness that wrapped around her like a long-forgotten embrace. Her body sank into the thin bedding, but her heart remained wide awake, wrestling with the realization that fate had not abandoned her after all. She closed her eyes, whispering her late husband's name with a gratitude she had not felt since the day she lost him, and for the first time in months, she slept without fear. But as dawn crept across the room, and the first soft light touched her new door, Amma's life shifted once more, for destiny had left something waiting on her doorstep, something that would redefine everything she believed about fortune, loss, and the power of generosity. Blessings rarely arrive alone. They often travel in quiet sequences, each one unfolding like a whispered promise. And for Amma, still adjusting to the miracle of a roof over her head, the next blessing approached with a timid knock, a trembling voice, and a moment that would shift the rhythm of her life once more. Amma had barely risen from the thin mat when she heard the gentle tapping at her door. It wasn't urgent, not loud, but soft, hesitant, almost apologetic. For a brief second she froze, unsure whether the sound was real or part of a dream she wasn't ready to leave. She had never woken inside a home since losing her husband. The stillness of the walls felt unfamiliar, and the idea that someone would knock for her felt even stranger. She wrapped her shawl around her, steadied her breath, and moved toward the door with cautious steps. When she opened it, she found a young girl standing before her, barefoot, dusty, and clutching a small wooden box to her chest. The girl's eyes flicked upward, carrying both nervousness and importance. She shifted her weight, as though the message she carried felt heavier than the box itself. "Are you Amma?" the girl asked softly, her voice almost lost beneath the morning breeze. Amma nodded, watching the girl's tense posture closely. The child extended the box with both hands, her fingers trembling slightly. "The merchant's son, the traveler you helped, he asked me to bring this to you." Amma blinked, taken aback. The boy she had fed had already given her more gratitude than she believed she deserved. The roof above her was a blessing her heart still struggled to accept. And now, another gift? Her breath caught in her throat, creating a tightness she hadn't expected. She reached out slowly, as if afraid the box would vanish if she touched it too quickly. The young girl waited in silence, her expression guarded. Amma offered her a grateful nod, but the girl had already stepped back, ready to leave. Within moments, her small figure disappeared down the narrow path, leaving Amma standing in the doorway with the box pressed gently against her trembling palms. She closed the door behind her and sank onto the mat, letting the weight of the moment settle around her. The box was carved from dark wood, worn smooth by time and handling. It was not fancy, yet it carried a quiet dignity. Amma hesitated before opening it, her heart anticipating something modest, a token, a message, perhaps a piece of fruit or bread. She lifted the lid with careful fingers. At first, all she saw was a folded cloth, soft from age. She unfolded it slowly, revealing what lay hidden inside, an old leather pouch, weathered and tied tightly with a thin strip of rope. Her breath quickened. She recognized the heaviness in its shape, even before she touched it. Coins. She loosened the knot and gently poured the contents onto her lap. The coins spilled forth in a small cascade, gold, thick, shining dully in the morning light. Amma gasped, pressing her hand to her chest as if to steady her racing heart. It was more money than she had seen in her entire life, more than she had ever imagined she would hold, more than enough to change the course of her future. Beneath the pouch lay a folded note. Amma picked it up with trembling fingers. The handwriting was careful, almost hesitant, as though every stroke carried meaning. "For the hunger you saved in me." Amma's throat tightened. She read the words again, feeling their weight press deep into her spirit. This was not charity. This was gratitude, pure, sincere, and undeserved in her eyes. She felt tears gather, hot and overwhelming, blurring the shapes of the coins in her lap. She whispered a trembling prayer of thanks, her voice shaking through the small room. She closed the pouch, holding it gently against her heart. For the first time in months, she felt something she had long forgotten. Security. Not complete, not permanent, but real enough to untie the knots of fear inside her. The house had given her shelter. This pouch offered possibility. Amma believed the surprises had reached their end, that fate had gifted her more than she was worthy of. She wiped her tears, steadied her breath, and allowed a fragile hope to settle quietly within her chest. But destiny was not finished with her yet. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across her new doorway, another unexpected visitor approached, carrying news that would turn her world in a direction she never dreamed possible. Hope travels faster than the wind when it finds a willing heart. What begins as a quiet act of compassion can ripple outward with surprising force, stirring souls, awakening conscience, and shifting the way a community sees itself. And in the days that followed Amma's unexpected blessing, her story began to move through the village like a gentle tide, returning to shores long forgotten. The morning after the young girl delivered the wooden box, Amma stepped out of her new home with with the leather pouch tucked safely beneath her shawl. The world looked different, not because the village had changed, but because she finally belonged somewhere again. Rays of sunlight filtered through the jacaranda branches, casting soft shadows across her doorway. She felt the light for the first time in months without shrinking from it. Her steps were steadier, her breath less burdened, her heart carrying a fragile but undeniable warmth. Word of what had happened reached the marketplace long before Amma arrived there. At the sight of her, heads turned, not with pity, but with a quiet curiosity. Whispers followed gently on the breeze. The widow who shared her last bread. The widow who sheltered a stranger. The widow who found kindness returning to her like rain after drought. For months, people had passed her without noticing, their eyes skimming over her like she was part of the dust beneath their feet. Now those same eyes softened with respect. A group of women selling cassava paused their work and called her over. One of them, a woman who once brushed past Amma with irritation, offered a small basket of roasted maize. Her voice held a tremor of regret. "Forgive us," she murmured, not meeting Amma's gaze. "We should have seen your struggle. We should have helped." Amma accepted the basket quietly, feeling no anger, only a strange tenderness. Hardship had carved deep lines in her life, but it had never taught her bitterness. Other villagers stepped forward too. A herdsman offered to help repair the cracked window of her new home. A seamstress promised to mend her worn shawl. A group of young boys began leaving small bundles of firewood at her doorstep every morning. Each gesture felt like a soft thread, sewing her back into the fabric of the community she had once lost. The distance that had grown between her and the village after her husband's death began to dissolve beneath the warmth of rekindled humanity. But the most unexpected change appeared later that afternoon, when a group of hungry children drifted toward her home, their eyes shy and uncertain. They hovered near her door, their thin shoulders hunched, their feet shifting nervously in the dust. Amma recognized the look all too well, the silent plea of those who craved food, but feared asking. Her heart tightened. Without hesitation, she invited them in, offering pieces of yam and small portions of stew she had prepared with the coins from the leather pouch. The children ate quietly at first, glancing at one another as though afraid the moment would vanish. Amma moved gently among them, adjusting their seating, smoothing their hair, wiping crumbs from little faces. The room that had felt foreign to her just the day before now pulsed with life. Their soft chatter filled the air, their laughter rising like music she had forgotten how to hear. She felt the familiar rush of purpose, something she had once shared only with her late husband, now returning, reshaping her days with meaning she had thought forever lost. News of her generosity continued to spread. People began sending leftover meals, fruits from their gardens, herbs from their kitchens. Amma turned none of it away. Each gift she received became a gift she offered again, continuing the cycle that had lifted her from despair. Before long, her small home became a gathering place, not just for children, but for widows seeking comfort, for elders seeking companionship, for wanderers seeking warmth. It became a space where people rediscovered dignity, and where Amma rediscovered herself. Yet even as the village embraced her, Amma could not shake the feeling that something else was coming, something larger than the house, larger than the coins, larger even than the renewed kindness around her. There was a sense of movement in the air, a whisper of destiny approaching from a path she had not yet walked. She felt it in the stillness of night, in the hush that followed each child's laughter, in the way her heart tilted forward as though expecting someone. And she was right. For the greatest blessing of all was already making its way toward her, carrying the weight of her past and the promise of her future in a single breath, ready to step into her life in a way she could never have foreseen. From the ashes of sorrow, sometimes truth rises carrying light. Light so unexpected it startles the heart awake. Amma had spent months believing her past held nothing but grief. Yet as the sun dipped low that evening, she sensed a quiet tremor in the air, as though destiny was preparing to return something she thought she had lost forever. Amma was sweeping the small patch of earth outside her new home when she noticed a lone figure approaching along the narrow footpath. The man walked slowly, almost hesitantly, as though each step carried the weight of an unspoken story. His clothes were simple but clean, his back slightly bent from years of labor. When he drew close enough for Amma to see his face clearly, recognition did not come, but something in his eyes held a familiarity she could not name. He stopped a respectful distance from her, his hat held against his chest. "Are you Amma?" he asked softly. "The widow of Kofi Mensah?" Her breath caught in her throat at the sound of her husband's name. It had been months since anyone had spoken it aloud. The memory of Kofi's gentle smile and warm laughter rushed back with painful clarity, pressing tears into her eyes. She nodded slowly, her voice unable to form a reply. The man exhaled deeply, as if releasing a burden he had carried far too long. "I am Adisa," he said, "a friend of Kofi's from the northern trading routes. We traveled many paths together, and on one of those journeys he spoke of you with a devotion I have rarely seen in any man." His tone softened. "He trusted me with something before he died." Amma felt her knees weaken. She steadied herself against the doorway, afraid of what memory this stranger might unravel. Her husband's death had been sudden, cruel, and without farewell. The idea that he had left something behind, something meant for her, made her heart race with fear and longing both. Adisa reached into the leather satchel slung across his shoulder and retrieved a small, square container, wooden, polished, and sealed with a rusted lock. Despite the wear, the craftsmanship was delicate. Amma recognized the pattern carved into its surface. Her breath hitched. Kofi used to carve that pattern onto small gifts he crafted by hand. It was the symbol of a rising sun, his promise that no darkness was ever final. "He asked me," Adisa continued gently, "to give this to you if life ever became too heavy. He feared you might face a storm without him, and he wanted to leave you something to hold on to." Amma's fingers trembled as she accepted the container. The weight of it settled into her palms like a heartbeat, long forgotten. She whispered Kofi's name under her breath, the sound breaking into a sob she struggled to contain. For a moment she feared opening the box, feared what memory might lie inside, what sorrow might return. But the longing to feel his presence again outweighed the fear. Adisa offered her a small silver key. "He trusted you would know what to do," he said, stepping back as though giving her room to breathe. Amma managed a fragile nod. Her hands shook as she inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a soft click, releasing the seal of months, perhaps years, of waiting. She lifted the lid slowly, expecting a letter, a token, perhaps a final message of love. Instead, she found a folded map, its edges worn but carefully preserved. Beneath it lay a second key, heavier, made of dark iron, cold against her skin. Her brow furrowed in confusion as she unfolded the map. The sketched lines led from the marketplace to the outskirts of the village, continuing toward a place she had not seen since the darkest chapter of her life, the land she once called home before her in-laws cast her out. Her chest tightened painfully as memories surged. The courtyard where she planted flowers with her husband, the doorway he carried her through after their wedding, the earth where she buried her grief the day he died. She had forced herself never to look back, believing nothing of value remained there. But now, Kofi's hand, gentle even through time, was guiding her back. Adisa bowed his head. "Your husband wanted you to have what he left there," he said. "He hid it the night before he fell ill. He feared his family would take everything from you." Amma pressed the iron key to her heart, feeling its weight as though it were her husband's final embrace. A strange mixture of dread and hope swirled through her. She had thought she'd already uncovered all the blessings fate intended for her. She was wrong. for the map pointed to a place Amma had not dared to return to since the day she lost her home, her husband, and her identity. And now destiny was calling her back to uncover what Kofi had hidden in the shadows of their past. Healing sometimes demands more than courage. It demands the willingness to step back into the shadows that once swallowed you whole. As Amma stood at the edge of the path leading to the land she once called home, she felt her heart tremble under the weight of memories she had spent months trying to silence. Yet something deeper than fear pulled her forward, an understanding that some wounds only close when one has the strength to face them. The journey to the old farmland unfolded beneath a sky washed in soft morning light. Amma walked slowly, each step a negotiation between hope and hesitation. The landscape had changed since she last stood there. The grass was taller now, wild and unkept, as though mourning the lives once lived upon it. The wind carried the familiar scent of mango trees, their branches heavy with fruit, just as they had been when she and Kofi harvested them together. Those memories rose gently, his laughter echoing through the fields, his hands brushing hers as they worked side by side, the dreams they whispered under starlit nights. The ache tightened in her chest, but she pressed on. When she reached the heart of the land, her breath caught. The old mango tree still stood, tall, strong, its trunk thick with age. This was the tree where she and Kofi had carved their initials during their first year of marriage, promising a future filled with joy and belonging. Now the carving was faint, softened by time, but its presence felt like a familiar hand resting against her shoulder, urging her to be brave. She held the iron key tightly, feeling its edges dig into her palm. According to the map, the chest lay buried directly beneath this tree, where the roots met the earth. Kneeling, Amma brushed away layers of fallen leaves and loose soil. Her fingers trembled as she began digging, the dirt cool and moist against her hands. With each handful she lifted, her heartbeat grew faster, as if her husband's spirit was standing beside her, guiding her movement. After several minutes, her fingers struck something solid. Her breath hitched. Clearing the remaining soil, she revealed a wooden chest, its surface weathered but intact, protected by the shade of the mango tree. She hesitated, overwhelmed by the reality of the moment. This chest had been waiting for her, buried by the man she loved, sealed with his final hopes. Tears blurred her vision as she inserted the iron key into the lock. It turned with a quiet, familiar click that echoed deep inside her. Opening the chest felt like opening a chapter she had never known existed. Inside, wrapped in cloth woven with patterns she recognized from Kofi's mother, lay dozens of gold pieces, shimmering softly, untouched by time. Amma gasped, covering her mouth. She had never known her husband possessed such wealth. He must have saved them in secret, piece by piece, protecting them from his relatives who would have claimed them greedily. Each coin felt like a promise, a future he had been planning to share with her. Beneath the cloth lay a folded note, the edges soft and fragile. Amma lifted it carefully, her fingers trembling as she unfolded the paper. The handwriting struck her immediately, bold strokes softened by affection. She could almost hear Kofi's voice as she read the words meant only for her. My Amma, if life takes me before I can give you the world, know that this is the beginning of the life I wanted us to build. Forgive me for any day I left you carrying worries alone. You were the blessing of my days, the peace in my nights. If you find this, it means I am gone. But my love has not left you. Use this to rebuild your life. Let it be the seed of your new beginning. And remember, you were always enough. The note slipped from her fingers as grief surged through her, the kind that was no longer sharp, but unbearably tender. She pressed the paper to her chest, letting silent tears fall onto the earth. For a long time, she knelt there, surrounded by the echoes of the love she had lost and the future he had secretly prepared for her. The gold was valuable, yes, but the words, the thought, the foresight, They were priceless. Amma cried not from sorrow, but from release. The heaviness she had carried for months loosened, dissolving into the warm morning air. She felt Kofi's presence in the rustling leaves, in the sunlight filtering through mango branches, in the stillness that wrapped around her gently, as though his spirit was telling her she had finally come home. But as Amma rose to close the chest, believing she had uncovered the final gift her husband left behind, a soft sound rustled behind her, footsteps approaching gently across the forgotten land, carrying a final twist in destiny she never saw coming. Blessings may delay, but they do not vanish. They wait quietly in the shadows until a heart wounded by hardship is finally ready to receive them. As Amma walked back toward her new home, carrying her late husband's hidden treasure pressed tightly against her chest, she felt as though the world itself had shifted beneath her feet. The sorrow that once anchored her down now seemed to guide her forward, preparing her for a life she never imagined she would live again. Amma stepped inside her small home with a reverence usually reserved for sacred spaces. The moment she placed the wooden chest on the table, the entire room felt warmer, as though Kofi's love had finally returned to fill the emptiness she had endured. She spent the night studying the gold pieces, each one polished by time, each one holding the weight of silent sacrifice. She traced the faint engravings on their surfaces, letting her fingers memorize the truth. Her husband had never abandoned her. Even in death, he had given her the chance to rise. The following morning, Amma sat by her window as the village stirred awake. She watched mothers sweeping their doorways, men hauling sacks to the market, and children running barefoot through dusty paths. Life moved with the same rhythm it always had, but for the first time in many months, Amma felt herself capable of joining it, not as a shadow surviving on scraps, but as a woman shaping her own future. Her heart, once heavy with grief, now pulsed with purpose. What she wanted most was simple: to feed those who knew hunger too intimately. She had lived that pain, carried it through countless nights, and felt its sharpness slice into her spirit. She understood it in a way only the starving could. So, with steady determination, Amma returned to the market district and found an abandoned corner stall that had long been ignored by sellers. Its roof sagged slightly, its wooden frame needed repairs, but something about it felt right, humble enough for her beginnings, strong enough for her dream. With the gold her husband left behind, and a small loan offered kindly by the merchant's family, Amma rebuilt the stall into a small bakery. She crafted it with her own hands, scrubbing walls, patching holes, polishing counters. Villagers watched in curiosity as the once frail widow transformed the space into something warm, inviting, and alive. The first morning she lit the fire in her clay oven. The aroma of fresh bread drifted through the market, causing people to pause mid-step. Amma's hands moved with the memory of baking beside her mother as a child, shaping dough with gentle precision, folding love into every loaf. But she did not open her bakery for profit alone. True to the promise etched into her journey, Amma placed a basket outside her shop every dawn, filled with warm bread for anyone who could not afford a meal. Children were the first to gather, curious at first, then hopeful, then overjoyed. They arrived barefoot and wide-eyed, their faces lighting up as Amma greeted each one with a smile soft enough to quiet even the harshest morning. Mothers approached her with gratitude, elders with blessings, travelers with awe. Day after day, Amma fed the poor freely, her bakery becoming a sanctuary where hunger paused at the door and dignity stepped inside. The merchant's family continued supplying flour and firewood, insisting that generosity must support generosity. Volunteers soon appeared, eager to help shape dough or sweep floors or carry bags. Amma guided them with the same gentleness she once offered to a starving traveler under an acacia tree. In time, her bakery became known across the region, not just as a place of food, but as a place of healing. People said the smell of her bread brought comfort even before they tasted it. Children waited eagerly at her doorstep each morning, calling her Mama Amma, a name that warmed her heart in ways she had forgotten were possible. Women sought her counsel, men offered protection, and strangers traveled miles simply to witness the widow whose kindness had rewritten her destiny. Every evening, long after the market had grown quiet, Amma would sit by the small window of her home, watching the last rays of sunlight fade gently over the horizon. She often thought of the day she had shared that stale piece of bread with a desperate man, how she had given it without imagining anything would return. Now her hands shaped enough bread to feed dozens each day. Her life, once stripped to nothing, had blossomed into abundance she had never dared to dream of. And each sunrise, as she opened her bakery doors and watched children rush toward her with laughter, she whispered the truth she had learned in the deepest season of her suffering. The bread she once shared in hunger had returned to her as a fortune beyond measure. Yet destiny still held one more chapter, waiting quietly just beyond tomorrow's dawn. If Amma's journey touched your heart, then don't let her message stop here. Like the video to support more powerful African stories and share it with someone who needs hope today. Comment below what part moved you the most. I read every message, and make sure to subscribe because the next life-changing story is already on its way.